And then you can promote first Maria. Okay. All right. Nice. I'm gonna have to figure out our speaker system. But yeah, you guys can go ahead. You can hear us on Zoom? Yep, okay, awesome. Okay, you session.
So I now call this January 17th work session of the Historic Review Committee to order. Seeing as it's a work session, do we have roll call?
Typically not at a work session, but the time is
5:11 p.m. And are there any revisions to the agenda? Nope. Seeing none, our first order of business is the work session led by CPS. If CPS and staff want to lead that work session, please go ahead. This is a work session, so free form.
Okay, awesome. And I think you meant Clarion. So we will hand it over to Gabby and Elizabeth.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we figured before we get started with the actual content of the agenda that we would just go around and do a few introductions. I think for some of you, this might be the first time seeing us, Clarion, or really sort of diving into the project. So we just wanted to get familiar with each other. So my name is Gabby Hart. I am a senior associate with Clarion, and I work primarily on updating land use and zoning codes across the state. And I'm just really excited to be doing this alongside Elizabeth Garvin, who I will let introduce yourself.
Thanks, Gabby. Is my sound okay, everyone?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm Elizabeth Garvin. I'm a director at Clarion Associates. I am an attorney and land use planner and have been drafting codes for about 30 years now. Happy to be here. Really privileged to be working with the town of Silverton and looking forward to listening to the conversation tonight. Should we send it around on the screen, or do you guys want to move it to the room at this point?
Why don't we start with Zoom participants?
Okay, so if we go clockwise on my screen, I'm sorry, counterclockwise. Shane is next.
Sure. Hi, I'm Shane. I'm currently the mayor of Silverton and just interested in our land use and real estate development here.
Very cool. Melissa is next.
Hi. Yeah,
So-
hi. I'm Melissa Childs, and longtime Silverton resident. And yeah, this is my area of interest, and I'm on the planning commission, so also I'm representing that. Thank you.
Great to see you both. Maria, I don't see you on screen. Do you want to join us or at least say hi, unmute? Nope. Okay, Maria, if you decide to chime in later, just join us. David, you're next, and then Lucy, we move back to the room.
Hi everyone. My name is David Pollitt, and I'm currently in a place called Dibrugarh, India. So that's why I had my video off. I don't have the best connection, so I apologize for being antisocial, but I'm interested in hearing the conversation, so I'll turn my video back off in a moment, but it's nice to meet you all.
Thanks, David. Lucy, over to you.
Awesome. My name is Lucy Mulvihill, and I'm the Community Development Director for the town of Silverton. And we have Gloria with us too.
I'm helping out. Gloria Kasperger, I'm the town administrator.
I'm Jessie Rowe. I'm a citizen who lives in the Historic Committee or the Historic Overlay District, and I'm the committee chair.
Me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Mike Ariak, very long time resident. And I guess my best title out of all the titles I've held was president of the Blair Street Historic District Association. So I'm very, very interested in every historic aspect of the town of Silverton. Thank you.
Awesome. And that is our in-person group.
Okay, great. Thank you. So just to get everyone oriented to the project, I figured I would pull up some of the brief sort of slides that we used at some of our kickoff meetings, just to give everyone an idea of what the project is, where we're going. Let me share my screen. Maybe. Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So, a little bit of a background on the project. So very recently, the Town of Silverton Compass Master Plan effort was underway and adopted formally. And so now the code helps implement that. And in addition to the Compass Master Plan, the code also helps address some of the recommendations made in the housing needs assessment, as well as the development readiness assessment. So really, it is a key implementation tool for the major visionary planning and development policies that the town established through those planning efforts. Actually, I'll go back to this really quick just to note, we are working hand in hand with obviously town staff, which includes CPS, Community Planning Strategies, and then another representative of our team who is not here is Shay Coburn from Urban Rural Continuum. And so she is also on the consultant team. She has done a ton of housing and zoning work. She worked in the public sector prior for the town of Ridgeway. So you will see her as well throughout the process. Just a note of what the overall project goals are, again, to align with the Compass Master Plan, creating more predictable development outcomes by simplifying and clarifying both standards as well as procedures. We're consolidating multiple chapters of the municipal code into one zoning code or land use code to make it more clear and consistent. And then really large goal is to make all of these resources and the code itself more user-friendly and easier for everyone to understand, both staff, residents, developers, applicants, anyone who might use the code. And then just a bit about our project timeline. So we started with an annotated outline, which is available on our project website, and we encourage you to check that out. That's where all of our materials live. There will be video recordings of community learning sessions. It's a great place to look. But so we are in this sort of key drafting chunk of time between January and April. So in the background, we are working with staff to actually draft and update the regulations. And then on the community side of things, staff, and we are supporting them in community learning sessions. And so we had our first one of those last week before. And that is recorded and available on the website if you want to check it out. It's about zoning and the development process in general. And then we'll have a few more throughout the winter, which we encourage you to attend and to let people know to either attend, or you can go back and listen to them once they've been recorded. And we'll also be meeting with our stakeholder group during this time. And that is a group of residents that represent a variety of development interests, from engineers to architects to builders. just people with a lot of good Silverton knowledge that can make the code very functional for the Silverton community. And then moving into the summer, we will have the full drafts available, and we'll be doing more targeted and kind of targeted and wide scale townwide public outreach. So that will really be when we are doing the major push for public engagement, though all of these resources will be available on the website throughout the winter and the spring, and then hoping to move into adoption in the fall. So that is a little bit of background on the project. Does anyone have any questions, clarifications, anything about that before we dive into the fun stuff?
Have you all received, I mean, I know the purpose of this work session is to talk about our historic overlay districts in a more informal setting. Have you all already received a lot of input on that topic?
No, we have not from the public, just from we received a few comments that it's confusing and that the applicability between the historic district and the architectural review overlay get confused, which I know you all have kind of been working on as well. But other than that, we hadn't really heard any specific details. We did have a little bit of the comments about, you know, what does historic mean? What is the historic design style of Silverton? But that was really it thus far. Okay. So we can start moving through these questions. And we can change the order of this if you want, if you would like to talk about the historic design overlay first. Happy to do that. But our first, just sort of general questions are about if you all have any feedback about the architectural review overlay district, and if you just your general feedback on how those have worked and if they've worked well or not, and why.
I think Elizabeth might have a hand up.
I do. I just want to jump in and let the group know that I'm going to be taking notes. So if I'm distracted to the right side of my computer, that's because I'm capturing our conversation. And I didn't want anyone to think that I was completely checked out. So thank you.
Sounds great.
I think Shane has his hand up as well. Shane has his hand up as well.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that there's sufficient context about the overlay district. Do you feel fully informed on why we created it and what purpose it was intended to serve?
I would love to hear it.
Okay. We talked about it briefly at our last trustee meeting because we were voting to revise the code provision that referenced the builder's handbook in the historic overlay district or the architectural review overlay district, because as it's currently drafted, or as it was then drafted, both the historic district and the AROD essentially were exactly the same. And the change that we made reduced some of the restrictions relating to the AROD, which was the original intention. It came about when a marijuana retailer was trying to build a storefront just outside of the historic district called Kind Castle. And it was viewed by the community, these are not my words, these are community words, as like a gaudy storefront that looked like a castle with a large neon sign. And we didn't really have any good code provisions in place that gave the planning commission or the town board or administrative review a whole lot of substance for rejecting something that was so visually different than everything else and clearly not aligned with our character and historic nature. So we somewhat hastily adopted the A-Rod to give us something so that we could, outside of the historic district, have some oversight about the aesthetic continuity. Personally, when it comes to the questions that are being asked, I don't have any problem removing the A-Rod in favor of townwide district or use-specific design standards, as long as we still meet the intent of when we adopted the A-Rod, to make sure that throughout all of Silverton, there's something that's keeping us from seeing, something that's clearly out of place and, architecturally, or not architecturally, but aesthetically inappropriate for a place like Silverton to maintain its character.
So Shane,
While also not being incredibly overbearing. I just want to put that, like, I don't think we should have like strict controls of it. Everything has to be Victorian cookie cutter in these 3 colors. But I want to make sure that you can't build like, a glass skyscraper in the middle of town also.
so to clarify, do you feel that you or those you've heard of would be in favor of expanding the historic district and getting rid of the A-Rod? Is that kind of what you're saying?
I'm saying that I don't like the form. I'm saying that I care about the substance, not the form. So if like the A-Rod as it stands isn't great, we did it hastily just to give us something. And if there's a way to revise the A-Rod to better serve its purpose, then I think that's great. Or if removing the A-Rod in favor of one of these proposed sets of design standards, whether it's townwide district or use specific, I think anything that serves the purpose is fine with me.
Okay.
Or not fine with me. It's not that it's not my call. So I would support anything that serves a purpose.
Sure. David, you have a hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. Yeah, thanks, Shane, for the sure my video isn't coming on. Sorry, it's my bandwidth. I appreciate the explanation on the A-Rod. Part of the conversation we had at the last meeting was some confusion about whether the Historic Review Committee would oversee the A-Rod as well as the historic district. So that kind of fed into the question that we just had there. I think there needs to be some clarity on where the Historic Review Committee applies.
Is that something that someone from Clarion or Lucy, you want to take like just a quick overview for folks who might not be familiar?
Sure. Yeah. So, we have had, when the A-Rod was, established, it was to be reviewed by the Historic Review Committee, or at least that was what was happening when I, joined, and previously that was the Planning Commission. And, when we separated out the Historic Review Committee from the Planning Commission, part of the reason why we did that was to become a certified local government, but also because the Planning Commission requested it. And so it didn't really make sense to have the A-Rod still be reviewed by the Planning Commission if we were going to have this new Historic Review Committee. So we decided to have the Historic Overlay District and the A-Rod fall under the review of the Historic Review Committee, kind of with the understanding that it would be addressed in the code update, addressed in this conversation right now.
Okay. So for those maybe not familiar, can we talk about like, David, were you asking what blocks the Historic Committee or the Historic Review District versus the A-Rod?
No,
like,
I was kind of agreeing with Shane more than anything. I think that if the A-Rod served a purpose at its time, then but is open to review and can be integrated with a historic district or in some way standardized, if that's the desire of the town, then I think that kind of clarifies it. But I was just reflecting back on the discussion that we had a month ago when some of these same themes came up, like what are we reviewing, where's it applicable, what does it mean to be in the historic district versus the AROD? So I think that was kind of a common theme that we had last month that was kind of being touched on again.
I think to add on to that just real quickly, I think it's mostly about rhetoric, where if we remove the architectural review overlay district and we go towards some townwide design standards or other types of design standards, does this committee still have oversight, and does it become the design standard committee instead of the historic review committee?
So I'm curious too, like, have you all heard feedback from citizens about wanting something like that, like a overall design standards overall? I know I personally have heard that people would like something to reference if they so choose to build that way, like more information about what the architectural standard what the architectural types were in town, that's kind of accurate and kind of more cleaned up than the builder's handbook, which is kind of a mess. But no one really wants to be told what they can build. Is that what you guys have heard too?
Yes, I've heard that.
So so many things get rolled into this conversation about what can be built. And we often find in our work that people talk about a design type, an architectural design type, because that's easiest to reference. It brings an image to mind. When we update the land use code, we first want to make sure that we're getting things right in terms of the massing of the structures, like how big is everything in relationship to something else, or how close are they? Or when I transition from something that is in, a historic area to something that's new, maybe residential, can it be taller? Should it be shorter? So we get into predominantly the form and scale of the development. And we try to make that within the code as objective as possible. So it doesn't require a board for review because of where we are with applicants. It's challenging for an applicant, particularly if they're going to do one project in town, their house or their building, to get caught up in an extended process about preferences over architectural design. So once we have the regulations in place with respect to form and scale, then we take another look and say, okay, where do we want to go with specific design? Do we care about where the openings are on the facade? Do we care about the roof shape? We do in Silverton because of very simple snow problems. Do we care where front entrances are? After that, we have a conversation about materials. Are we setting the code up with the materials that are durable enough in mountainous Colorado where they're going to last more than 2 years, or where they're going to live through the sunshine that they're going to get all summer? And so we start drilling down, always with the question of, do we have enough? We don't typically dive in with, we want to see, neo-Victorian architecture, and if you don't have 15 spindle columns across the front of the porch, there's going to be hell to pay. So we start from big to small and from general to detailed, and that's kind of where we are right now. To go way back to your question, we usually don't hear from the public about what is confusing them or what is working for them until we get most of the document down and they've got something to respond to. So that's where Gabby and Shay and I have been putting our efforts to get to that place. So there's a full code out there. And so we can say, hey, what if we peel back on the AROD and we insert XYZ standards? And, with the images that will go in the new code and the discussions that the town has had about the regulations that are in place, we can then have we done enough conversation, or does the town want to see more? What's the comfort level here? And that's when we start refining the code. So that was a really long answer. Did it make sense? Is there anything I need to back up on?
Well, I was just going to say that was really helpful context. And I think we may end up by kind of talking past each other in this specific instance, just because I guess it would be helpful to know if the purposes of tonight's meeting you're looking for feedback from us as citizens that are broader than the scope of this particular committee, or if it would be helpful to like kind of like, so at the last meeting, we really dug into what our scope is, and we didn't want to duplicate the review that the planning commission does. And so we kind of made sure that we understood our scope to be fairly narrow as an aesthetic review committee as it relates to the restricted parts of town. As opposed to like individually, we all definitely have opinions and are curious to talk about building heights and, you know, the other factors you were talking about. But I think as far as the scope of what we were appointed for, it's pretty limited.
Thanks. And I think to make the most of everybody's time, Gabby actually has us kind of tuned into that conversation. So I will step off the soapbox and go back to my typing over here, and Gabby can jump in with the questions that would be really helpful to get answers to tonight.
Yeah, and this will kind of, I guess, preface that next bullet point on the agenda, which is about the actual historic design overlay. And so, you know, we're kind of talking about two different things. The idea of having town-wide basic design standards that Elizabeth described, but then we're keeping the historic design overlay and we're updating the builder's handbook. And so those will still include the type of the scope of, you know, what the committee is responsible for. So things about aesthetics, specific design guidelines for historic forms. So we can actually move into talking about that and your experience with, if you have any, with the builder's handbook. And I don't know, Lucy, I know that staff had some good feedback for us. If you wanted to sort of summarize your thoughts on it too, that might spark some stuff for everybody else, but we can move into talking about that. It's just, we can't really talk about one without making sure that we're kind of on the same page about design in general in Silverton. So thank you for starting that conversation and helping us all get on the same page here.
So to clarify, the conversation topic now is within the scope of the Historic Review Committee and the Historic District, what do we think of the Builder's Handbook? Not for all of town, right?
Right.
Okay.
Builder's handbook.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll just jump in really quick with a little bit of what we've talked about. And I know everyone here has their own thoughts on the builder's handbook, but some things that we've talked about so far is that the builder's handbook kind of puts different types of designs into different areas of town. And maybe that's not the best approach, as well as kind of combining multiple styles of architecture that has been seen in Silverton, while leaving some out in some instances. And that what we really want to move towards is basically a design guideline that is really objective and really specific, but while still allowing, you know, modern materials, and some choice for people building.
Let's all be reminded that someone mentioned this earlier about the cookie cutter effect. And I think that makes for a very boring situation. So we have to be really careful. There's guidelines and then there's guidelines. And some people will see that as saying, well, they want me to build something exactly like this or exactly like that. We've got to be careful because the history of the town is not cookie cutter. And the history of the town is not Victorian because it's partly Victorian, partly mining, partly railroading, and partly a whole lot of other things. I like that diversity and I want to keep some of that diversity. Now, I know there's always going to be restrictions. So sanitation, whatever, you know, the usual builders restrictions and so you have to have water, you have to have sewer, all of that. We know that. That's a given. So, but we got to be really careful about trying to make something that, again, cookie cutter comes up to mind. So we don't want to be a cookie cutter town. We have never been a cookie cutter town, and I don't want to start now. So I'd be really careful coming up with guidelines. Guidelines should be somewhat flexible,
Mhm.
allowed for people's artistic input on things. Doesn't mean, it's like Shane said, that no big buildings of any kind, nothing like that, nothing that's, we all know, I think we're all smart enough to know what's out of place. We know what's out of place, and we say, oh, that's right off the top, that's not gonna fit in or something. I like to use my term, historic value. But historic value has a little flexibility in it because all the different segments of this population throughout the years of what they built and so forth. Again, I know there's regulations or something. I'm not saying we should allow people to live in tents like we used to in the early days, little tents and little sheds and so forth. That may not fly, in the health construction version of things. But let's be very careful when we talk about guidelines. So guidelines are fine, but if we get too stringent about that, I think we're leaving out a lot of possibility of the artistic bent of people. And we want the creative look here in Silverton. I like creative people, and sometimes creative people have creative ideas, and it doesn't always fit into a certain segment. They're more like a square peg in a round hole. But we've got to listen to everybody, see what they have in mind, and don't be so stringent that, we're going to turn down somebody who wants to do something a little more flexible. And so, because again, I don't like cookie cutter. That reminds me, well, we might as well be a shopping center in New Jersey or something. That's, we don't want that look. We don't want that standard look or something. Silverton has not been known for like standardization. So people have done so many different things in this town, in buildings and so forth. And I appreciate that. I appreciate that diversity and that artistic outlook. So all I'm saying is, yeah, we got to have some type of guidelines. That's fine. But let's not be too stringent. And the whole idea, one of the last points was being flexible, listening to people, working with people, rather than just saying no, no, no. We just start saying no to everything. We're not going to progress any in this town. We're not going to have things. There's a lot of creative people around who want to do creative things. Let's give them a little bit of room to do their creative thing. And don't, again, cookie cutter is, it's an ugly term to me. Thank you.
Yeah. Elizabeth, you have a hand up?
I do. I wanted to jump in and say what I'm hearing is that your experience with design guidelines has been guidelines that create monotony, right? That's what we're hearing with the cookie cutter. So more Levittown than Silverton, or the horrible New Jersey mall that I worked in college, which I wouldn't wish on Silverton or even on New Jersey any longer. So I just want to capture that and recognize. So if we come out with design guidelines, they are guidelines that speak to the eclectic style of Silverton. A little mash of this, a little mash of that, and a little touch of the individual, and not and just saying that so you know that we've heard you, and we wouldn't come to Silverton with design guidelines that reinforce everyone should have a house in the suburbs and make you look like Wheat Ridge. So we definitely understand and can reflect that and then tweak it further as you guys get it in front of you. Whoops.
So Elizabeth, you mentioned specifically like the experience with the builder's handbook. And I just want to highlight two somewhat nuanced things that Lucy said that I think really speak to both the public input I've heard and then my personal experience, which of course is just my opinion. But currently it seems there are two main problems with the builder's handbook. One is the design standards are really different, but only like from street and use to another street and use. And in Silverton, that does feel a little silly when things are literally a block apart, that if you build something a block over, it looks totally different than if you build something here. And secondly, and I think this gets to what Mike is saying, there are a number of historically valuable styles in Silverton that are very distinctly different. And while an admirable effort, the Builder's Handbook does attempt to combine all of those styles to make an amalgamation that doesn't really look like any style for each section. So we do have a diversity of styles, but those styles have been invented, quite frankly, by the Builder's Handbook, and they don't look anything like any of what's beautiful and vibrant and historically wonderful about Silverton. So if there was a way to change those two things, personally, again, just my opinion and what I've heard from the few people I've talked to, I think that would be valuable for the town, because saying things like exactly a 7.5-inch horizontal siding reveal, like, doesn't necessarily conform to a specific style. It doesn't and I'm getting into specifics, but it doesn't necessarily mean that something's going to look historically accurate, but it does mean that all the houses on one block will have that same siding. For example.
Not too thrilled about that.
Right. And those are the kinds of things in the Builder's Handbook that really, I think, would tie our hands as a committee, is that folks aren't allowed to say, you know what, my building is Edwardian stone, and that means this. And so in order to sit with Edwardian stone, I don't know what the solution is to that. You all are the experts. I think it would be hard to rewrite design standards for all 6 or 8 styles that are here in town, that are historically accurate. I don't know what the solution is there, but I guess if we're dreaming big and we have endless time and budget, which no one ever does, I would want to see all 8 styles, with good examples, maybe not just from Silverton, but surrounding communities. And here's a couple things you could do to look like that. Pick one and then bring us your design. Shane, your hand is up.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the really, I think, significant limitations of the Builder's Handbook is that all the examples are from the town itself in various stages of decay. Not all of our representative styles have been maintained. And so I think, finding what the actual ideal version of that style is, even if it's not in Silverton, would be helpful so that people can pin off of that rather than something that maybe is no longer a good representation. And I also agree with Mike. I like the variety.
So from sort of a committee perspective, if the handbook shifted to be kind of more what you're talking about of in the historic design overlay, any of these styles are known historic styles. Here are some of the elements. Do you all feel, what would make it most comfortable for you all to administer that? Is it you need 5 of 7 requirements? Is it we're going to look at it and just sort of, make sure it's compatible? What are some of the criteria or details of that would help you as a committee, make those decisions or make those recommendations?
My initial thought is that the Builder's Handbook should primarily be a resource for the people building stuff, and that the committee should really just serve as a backstop to ensure that we don't have anything egregious. I think it's been kind of viewed as the inverse, where our historic review committee has been very into the details of the review, even when something aesthetically looks correct but isn't the material that's historically accurate. I don't know if we still have that issue, but I know that in the past we had some challenges between applicants and the historic review committee where it was something as specific as that was rejecting an application where a modern material was a fraction of the price and lasted much longer and had better R value, but the planning commission or whoever was reviewing at the time wanted to see the more historically accurate material used. So I just think it would be, and maybe it's somewhere in the middle, but my view would be that we're just maintaining a backstop and we're not actually getting into the weeds and saying, like Jesse said, oh, that's 1.25 inches instead of 1.5 inches, things like that. And that we create a resource so that people can do the best job possible, as opposed to it being like a rule book.
Yeah, I think from a like personal opinion, again, like I think if we had, say, whatever number of historic designs, let's say there's 5, and there was like a new builder's handbook that was 5 pages long, and each design standard had 1 page. And to your point, it had, say, 10 criteria. If you're doing 6 of the 10, you're good. And you only have to pick 1 design. Like you don't have to pick Edwardian and Victorian and like saloon from the last pandemic all together,
And
So-
I would love to hear also what Melissa thinks, because she's been part of those discussions over the past few years as a member of the Planning Commission. And so I'm speaking from more of like an idealistic rather than practical, I've been in it position.
Hey. Oh. Hold on, I've got too many things happening here. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
Maybe not.
No, we can.
Now we can.
we can
Okay,
hear you.
Gotcha. Yeah, I just had you on multiple devices. It confused me. So I think we're talking about the builder's handbook, right? And I don't love that document. I'd like to see that just go away entirely and start over. And to Mike's point, I don't love the idea of any kind of blanket design standards for a town. I'm all for the A-Rod because we do need to protect, our Green Street and our highway frontage. And I'm all for the historic overlay, but I am not in favor of just blanket design standards because people have a right to build what they want. Honestly, I think that, outside of these 2 overlay districts, it should be setbacks and building code, essentially height restrictions. And yeah, and I'm sorry, Shane, because I was distracted. So what are you asking my opinion about specifically?
I was thinking about the use of the Builder's Handbook in the committee, and I was suggesting that the Builder's Handbook or whatever replaces it should really be a resource for the builder as opposed to the rule book for the committee. And the committee serves as like a backstop to protect from something egregious happening, as opposed to being like in the weeds saying, going through and checking the box that every single detail meets every single criteria.
Right. And I would be in agreement with that. But I think again, and it sounds like everybody's open to this, but just scrap the builder's handbook, start over. And that's for builders. And if there's questions beyond that, it comes to us. Right. So I'm in agreement with you, Shane, that we're the backstop to that. So, yeah, thank you.
So would you all be in favor of a lot more administrative decisions and only bringing kind of questionable applications to the Historic Review Committee?
I think that part, personally, I think that really depends on what the builder's handbook ends up looking like. Because if it's really prescriptive, administrative decisions are easy, right? And expediting the process for builders here in town with our short building season, how great would that be? That said, if it becomes relatively kludgy or more arbitrary, then I think that puts you or someone else on staff in the position of being the only decision maker. And that's risky from a like favoritism perspective, but or not real favoritism, but like assumed favoritism by community members. I mean, that's the one thing that would scare me about that.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah.
I think that fair to the applicants, it should probably come in front of the review committee. I mean, to appear, right?
Yeah.
I was just going to copy what Jesse said, and if it appears subjective or is likely to include some form of tension or conflict, let the committee be the arbiter so that it doesn't create conflict with staff and community members.
Yeah, and we'll have the ability as we sort of develop it and see how it ends up looking to set up kind of a tiered system of, here's what really could be administrative based on kind of the amount of renovation happening or the type of building happening. Here's what always needs to go before the committee, as well as giving staff the ability to, whenever they think it might be necessary because of certain circumstances, they could kick it up to the Historic Review Committee. We've also seen historic review committees that kind of get a almost consent agenda type list, and that has the admin, and then you would be able to pull one off the consent agenda based on any concerns you may have.
I think that sounds really great, actually, where applications pursue administratively unless either staff or the applicant requests committee review.
I think something else that's maybe not on here as a question, but I think does happen, whether codified or in practice in Silverton, is sometimes the current builder's handbook goes in conflict with practical considerations for the building. And that puts the building inspector in an awkward place because he has to then go back and say, I, as the building inspector, for fire code reasons or whatever, have overruled this decision in this particular way. And he has to chronicle that. And so I'm not really sure how we could solve for that, but maybe if we have new design standards, like once they're put together, we could maybe do like a builders roundtable with some of the builders in town and be like, hey, is any of this like absolutely egregious to meet on most of your sites that you've worked on? Because we do have the benefit of having a lot of builders in town that are doing a high volume right now, who are probably very familiar with things like snow shedding and a lack of street drainage in Silverton proper. I'd really love to hear from David a little bit too, because he has a unique kind of newer to Silverton set of eyes on this.
Oh, David, you're muted.
Try and mute David.
Sorry, thank you. I guess to summarize my thoughts, I'm kind of in agreement with what's being said generally. I think the fairest way to approach this is that, as Shane kind of said, the committee acts as a backstop. And I think probably to me that means the majority of applications come to the committee. But as you said, Jesse, I think that depends on what the design standards look like. And I think the design standards, if they're simplified and they're straightforward and they're for builders, as Melissa said, then really it should, in the majority of cases, be a simple process, and it's kind of a box checking exercise that it's come to the committee's looked at it and it's fine. And then there'll be the minority of cases where there's some something that may appear to be in contravention of the standards, and that's when there's a discussion and the committee kind of weighs in. But in general, I'm in agreement with kind of what's been said, and I think most of us here are aligned on what the committee should do, where it should be applied. And I think the first step is getting the design standards, builder's handbook, whatever it's going to be called, in a practical format that it doesn't have the confusion that the current document has. And that probably includes, as Shane said, I think that's a really good idea, of having examples from other places, because there's numerous, for instance, mountain towns with similar architectural styles in some respects nearby that we can leverage and give people a more clear guidance than is currently in the builder's handbook. So in summary, I'm in kind of general agreement with what's been said. I hope that was clear. I'm not sure if I'm coming through.
Well, that was great. Thanks, David. So I do want to circle back. We're almost out of time. We are out of time, But one thing that Clarion did propose to us that we haven't really given feedback on is this idea of a graduated level of approval. And I know we kind of danced around it a little bit, but it sounds like, just keep me honest, committee, that we are generally open to the idea of a gradual approval from administrative to committee or trustees, depending on the size or scope of the change or renovation. Is that what I heard? Yeah.
I support that. I just wanted to flag that the examples in the table are probably like 10x too large for Silverton. So for
Right,
example,
and
like major site, starts at 10 acres or something like that.
Yeah, and I meant to sort of preface that with, I mean, that one is from Glenwood Springs. So it's just trying to give you like an example of here's what one looks like. We would tailor it down to whatever works best for Silverton. Just needed to give sort of an example of what it looks like to do that. But yes.
Agreed. Shane, I had that same reaction. It's like huge for Silverton. Okay, so I want to be mindful of time because I think Clarion has a work session at 6 they have to go to. Is that right? I think we have a 6 o'clock time limit on this. Okay,
That is what we.
so we do have Ben Blue, it looks like, raising his hand, and our second agenda item is public comment. Is everyone okay if we move in the interest of expediency to public comment? Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes. Please state your name and your comment. Ben Blue, the floor is yours.
And Ben, we have just invited you to panelists. You have accepted. Excellent. If you unmute yourself, you'll be able to give your comment.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
My name is Ben Blue. My wife Sophie and I are Silverton residents. We currently live in a historic 19th century stone house in the 1200 block of Blair Street. We also own a vacant lot, block 36, lot 8. That's in the A-Rod. It's on the east side of Green between 10th and 11th Street. We intend to build a new construction commercial timber structure on that site without requesting any variances, applying the principles of sustainable development and infusing the spirit of Silverton into the DNA of our building. We've conducted a deep study into the historical context and historic review guidelines of Silverton, and we flew our architect out to Silverton for a week for an on-site. We estimate the completion for our project to be the end of 2025. The project will provide additional lodging in the town, as well as retail slated to be food and beverage. We've had some communication with staff already, including a pre-application meeting and submission of some documentation towards the application, specifically the wetlands delineation received by Lucy and Chris from CPS. We expect to turn in our application for complete risk review by the end of the month or the beginning of next month. I have no further comments for now, but I greatly look forward to sharing more with you and working with everyone on this committee and the relevant town employees for this exciting project we're working on.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben. Maria has a hand up. Maria, as a committee member, you can share whenever. I suppose seeing no further public comment. Maria, did you want to?
I think Maria's audio is not working. She sent me a text. So maybe I'll just read that. And Maria, if you have anything else, if you can't unmute, feel free to text me. But she texted me and said, I feel we should be proactive as opposed to reactive. We need guidelines that are flexible enough to work with, but give people guidance.
Awesome. Maria, if you can hear us, thank you for your excellent comment. All right, so as we are under a time crunch and seeing no more public comment, may I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion to adjourn.
Thanks, Mike. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thanks.
You can all in favor.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, thanks, guys. This meeting is hereby concluded.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thanks,